This is the best video online about Scyther, and maybe the most valuable compilation of all of the sources of this famous Norse magic practice. Velkommen alle sammen. In the coming couple of months, we will be going into a series of videos on shamanism and its relation to this famous practice in the Norse tradition, Scyther. The parallels, the symbolism and the mythology even, of Scyther, and even having some experts on the channel who are actually practicing these things to come and speak more about shamanism. Some scholars admit that Scyther was a similar practice to shamanism. Other scholars will argue that there was no such thing as shamanism in the Norse pagan tradition, but I'm here to argue that Scyther actually is a form of shamanism. Yeah, of course I know shamanism is the word used to describe the practice unique to the Siberian indigenous tradition. The purpose and outcome of this Siberian shamanism, yes, that was actually quite different to the Norse Scyther. But the techniques, the methods, the philosophy behind Scyther and shamanism was basically identical. It was a ritual where the spiritual leader would work themselves up into a state of trance, an ecstatic, frenzied state where a god or spirits would possess the human in order to enact whatever spiritual work there was. It's all the same. What's different, like I said, is the purpose or the outcome of it. Scyther was done for things like cursing, shape-shifting, divination, and other things in the Norse tradition. Shamanism in Siberia and other places in the world had a very different purpose, mostly to do with healing or astral travel, as I will cover in future videos. But today, we have to know first what the historical sources say on Scyther, the sources from the Viking Age and after or even before, because there's a lot of crap out there online from people who really haven't read any of these sources. Apart from the runes, actually, I would say there is no other subject online that is subject to so much crap as Scyther is. But here we go. So we're gonna debunk all of that stuff now. First, if you haven't noticed already, yes, the banner behind me is the Norse calendar for the new year. You've all been very patient, but now your favorite item from the shop is back in stock, a new calendar for the new year. A Norse calendar completely reconstructed from the oldest sources, and instructions right here about how to practice those holidays on the correct days. Video from last year explains all of this. Just note that this is based on the solar and lunar cycles. So it's going to be different from the northern to southern hemisphere. This is a northern hemisphere calendar. If you're in the southern hemisphere, go to the community tab on my channel and leave a comment. If there's at least 100 of you who like it, I'll make a southern hemisphere calendar as well too. Starting at your Norse New Year, which is in April. But for us in the northern hemisphere, our new year starts next week on the next full moon, October 28th. So on to the sources about Scyther. First, a quick look at the etymology of Scyther. It's definitely debated, but it is believed to come from a common Indo-European root word meaning tie or bind or string or cord. Remember that because I will come back to it at the end of the video. So as for the terms of Scyther that you will find in the Old Norse texts and Icelandic sagas, actual full accounts of the Scyther ritual are basically non-existent, unfortunately. There's only about 4 to 5 accounts of the actual ritual in decent detail. Far more often we find Scyther mentioned used as a noun to describe a person, and it's not necessarily referring to a practitioner of Scyther all the time, but just a general witch or wizard, usually in a negative connotation. We have Scythekona, meaning Scythe woman. It's attested only in a few places, by the way. We also have a couple of mentions of Scythemaður or Scythe man, which was very rare and incredibly shameful act for a man to do, as I will go over in just a bit. More commonly, we will find Völva, which would be like a witch or a seeress, who are attested as practitioners of Scyther numerous times. We also have words like Scythestafir, so a Scyther staff, showing how staffs were a key tool in this ritual. And one possible etymology, actually, of vulva, it can actually mean a staff bearer. Just noting that. And there are other sources and archaeological finds which show they clearly used a staff, these professionals and spiritual leaders like that. We also have mentions of what is called a seidhjallir, a seidr scaffold, which is oftentimes had to be built in the sagas in order for seidr to take place. So some sort of elevated platform or stage seems to be necessary for seidr. Finally, in many accounts of seidr, there is a phrase that is mentioned as seida til sin. So it means like to use seidr to attract to oneself. It almost describes in some of the sources as the victim or whatever else being pulled in by an invisible rope. So you see now where that cord or string etymology might fall into place there. But I'll speak about that towards the end of the video. Those are the terms that we actually find dozens of attestations of, referring to actual people who were practitioners of seidr or general magic. But there's actually a few mentions of the ritual seidr. Like I said, very few in comparison, but let's get on to those sources first. But we'll start with Heimskringla in Ynglinga Saga. This is kind of the earliest tales of the euhemerized gods when they came to Scandinavia. And in Ynglinga Saga, it says how Freya taught seidr to the Aesir. Freya, of course, being the goddess among the Vanir family of gods. A lot of people automatically assume Freya is the goddess of seidr. Just note that this example here in Heimskringla is the only source tying Freya to seidr. We have no more other than this. Far more often, it's Odin. Later in Ynglinga Saga, it says how Odin was able to practice seidr, and from this he was able to predict the fate of men, bring upon death, illness, and bad luck, and other malevolent things. And it also says that doing seidr brought forth such weakness and sexual shame, ergi, that it was considered the utmost unmanly thing to do, and it was reserved from that point on for women and priestesses only. So 2 parts to note there, and I'm going to keep coming back to this because pretty much all the other sources are in agreement with that. The Old Norse word ergi. By all accounts, this was the worst insult that you could call a man. It was an attack on his manliness. Scholars have associated the word with some sort of sexual shame, being like on the passive end of a homosexual act. It would have been equivalent to calling man the FA word, which was way more harsh back then than it is today, and you had the right to kill someone actually if they accused you of being ergi or nithing or rager. You can see my video I did on gay Vikings and Norse law. That's what a male practitioner of seidr would have been thought of as. But for a female, seidr seems to be pretty okay, acceptable by society. It's maybe not exactly something they would be proud of if their daughters did it, for example. It would have been maybe a little bit of a taboo act, but it would have been acceptable in certain situations. This is what gets us to think that seidr involved some sort of a feminine sexual act in this ritual, okay? So if seidr, if it was like other forms of shamanism, where you just kind of get into a trance, you bang on the drum like the Siberians do, or also the Sami Noaidi, which were exclusively men actually who did it. If it was just that, getting into a trance state, banging on a drum, that wouldn't be so bad. That's not so gay. No reason to call some man ergi if he just did that. But no, seidr was associated with the utmost shame for men, which leads us to believe that it was some sort of sexual act, some kind of feminine sexual act. Maybe it was nudity, maybe it was a feminine dance, maybe he was shoving that staff up somewhere that we don't want to know about. Another name for staff, by the way, in Old Norse was gandir, which was also a slang term for penis. So that could be in the ritual, or all of the above. What could also be part of it is what some scholars have brought to attention, is the act of being penetrated and possessed by a god or spirit, which would have been very edgy for a man, but not so bad for a woman, right? And actually, the receptive nature of women makes them better at this. They would be better able to be penetrated by a god or spirit in order to be possessed and do whatever they need to do after that. Whereas that definitely would not come natural to a straight man, anyway, as some scholars have brought to attention. And I'll link a few papers down below so you guys can read all about this as well. There's some great ones out there. So, on to the sources, see what else we can find. But also look at this part of Ynglinga Saga. It almost sounds like Odin did this and he brought shame upon all men. So men stopped doing it at that point. It almost makes it sound like as though Odin represented all men, even maybe like he possessed all men, okay? Just like his name means. His name literally means Lord of the Possessed in the oldest translations of it from Proto-Germanic and Old Norse meant the Frenzied One, the Possessed One, Lord of the Possessed, any of these. Most of you know this already if you've been following the channel, but that is largely what Odin represents in the myths. He is this ecstatic state of trance that comes in to possess humans in various moments during pain, death, war, ritual, and of course things like Seiðr. It wasn't that Odin was this gay, fruity man running around the world, practicing Seiðr, shoving a staff up his ass. No, Odin was the divine energy that possessed real humans during this ecstatic state. Just like Apollo was in the Greek oracles of Delphi. Just like in Eastern shamanism, just like in every other culture around the world, they believe when humans get into this trance state, they were possessed by their ecstatic god. Just keep that in mind as we go on. One more mention in the Ynglinga Saga before we move on. A bit later on in the history, it says how there was a Finn woman named Huld who used her Seiðr to bring about the deaths of 2 kings. Also remember this moving forward, the majority of times that we hear about Seiðr in the sources, it's women practicing that are attested as Finns, which would be referring to the indigenous Sami or Finno-Ugric culture of Scandinavia, which is actually related linguistically and culturally to the indigenous peoples of Siberia. So again, there's another connection to Eastern Siberian shamanism. One theory among scholars is that the more feminine fertility-based gods, the Vanir in the Norse myths, actually represent these indigenous Scandinavian Finns or Sami, or at least the gods that they worshipped. And the Aesir family of gods, Thor, Odin, Tyr, and so on, they represent this Indo-European and eventually Germanic, like more masculine, war-based culture. That's just one theory. Another theory says that the Aesir and the Vanir was actually a class between 2 different classes of the same society and culture, but two different classes among them is what they represented. Whatever, the time periods don't exactly line up. No theory we can say with complete confidence, but just keep it all in mind for now. So was Seiðr actually something that the Norse learned from the Siberia-related Finnish tradition when they came into Scandinavia? Or was Seiðr already present in Germanic or even Indo-European tradition for much longer before then? I don't know. Let's see what else we can find. The next source will be in Lokasenna, in the Poetic Edda, where Loki was hurling insults at the gods, and he basically called Odin a homo because he traveled among the world of men practicing Seiðr. Again, we see this association with Ergi here. We also see in this part, that's why you really have to learn some Old Norse to really get into our spirituality, because all these Poetic Edda translations are god-awful. Vet is not even a drum, and those words, vertio iflir, that means something to like become, to be, or to become, or to be possessed from above, like you see there. That part of the word oath is even related to óðr, meaning possessed or frenzy or ecstasy. So the point I keep coming back to, it's also shown here if we actually translate these things literally and correctly. My translation is right next to this in these lines, but I'm by no means an Old Norse expert, but I know enough to see a bad translation when it comes across. Next source, we have a couple more in the Poetic Edda. We have Hyndluljóð, another kind of prophetic poem where the Völva Hyndla tells about many things. One of them being that the Völva women came from Vidolfi, and Seid Berendir came from Svartölfi. We don't know exactly who those beings are. We think they're giants, but they're otherwise unattested in the Norse text. But this word Seid Berendir, that refers to male practitioners of Seidir. So Berendir is believed to be a very obscene word for the female genitalia. So it would be like calling a man a C word, basically. Again, well, here we see again the most negative view of men and Seidir. So although the sources I went over are considered to be mythological, the myths and the tales of Seidir could be thousands of years older than when they were actually written down. But parts of the myths actually we can say were born during the Viking Age, and they don't necessarily reflect a much older Germanic tradition. Valhalla, for example, is one of those things that actually doesn't seem to be that old of a concept. So it's important we determine how old Seidir might be. Fortunately, we have mentions of Seidir in the oldest texts we have in Old Norse, which are the skaldic poems dated to the early Viking Age. We have Lausavisa from Hvitgeir, referring to the Seidir practice of the Norwegian prince Rjongvald, who was a son of Harald Fairhair. We have one even older than that called Sigurdardropa by Kormak Ogmundarsson, and he refers to Odin and his seduction of the giantess Rindir by ways of Seidir. That's also a very old myth that we are pretty sure goes back long before the Viking Age. So this here is it's enough to show that there was at least an understanding of Seidir in the early Viking Age and long before that. So Seidir could absolutely be a much older Germanic practice and not just brought into Norse culture during the Viking Age. Next sources we will get into are the actual detailed descriptions of Seidir. There are really only two that go into half decent depth, okay? There's Eric the Red Saga. I'm putting up the whole text here so you can read it yourself, but I'm just summarizing the important parts. Speaking, a Seid Hjallid and a high seat was prepared for the woman. A cushion had to be stuffed with hen feathers that she would sit on. Then she showed up at night in a blue mantle, glass beads around her neck, lambskin hood. She had a staff with a knob on it, and it carried brass and stones inside of the knob on the staff. She had more types of different leather and furs on her, a pouch with talismans in order to get her knowledge, as it said here. And she asked if any of the women knew the Vardlukker, so basically the traditional songs that were sung to call the spirits to the area. Only one woman in the whole village knew it, but she didn't want to sing it because she was a Christian, and Christians definitely did not approve of this. But she ended up singing it anyway, and she sang it so well that the spirits were pleased and they all gathered to the area. And the way that it's written, it's like they were relaying a message, like the Seid Kuna specifically is relaying this message to the girl who sung it, like from the spirits. Like they said, thank you. She had contacted the spirits and they say thank you. That's at least what it sounds like to me reading this version, even though it's not translated that way too often. And the result of the ceremony was that the women doing the Seidir was able to look into the future to see how the farmer could appease the spirits of the area so that it would bring back good seasons of harvest and hunting and fishing. So there's quite a lot to break down in that text, especially with her tools and what she was wearing. That will take forever to explain the possible reasons for all of these things, but unfortunately it doesn't go into much other detail other than that. Was the actual ceremony, what was it like? What did the Seid woman do? Did she get into this trance state? How did she do this? What did she do with the staff? We don't know, but let's go into some other sources to see if we can find something else. The second and final source that goes into decent detail about an actual Seiðr ceremony is Örvar Oddsaga. It's quite a long text. It goes over quite a few pages, so it's not possible to put it up all here, but I'm just summarizing the key points. In here, it was a Völva, one woman who actually did the Seiðr, but she was accompanied by 30 men and women that were traveling along with her in order to aid her in this ritual. That's a very big number, but yeah, that is common in a lot of shaman traditions from around the world, where the actual shaman is accompanied by at least a few helpers in order to aid the ceremony and relay the messages. When these spiritual leaders, they get up to this state of trance, they often talk in riddles or just complete gibberish. So sober, level heads around them who they are familiar with are needed to help relay any messages. And in this source, Örvar Oddsaga, a Seiðhjálmur was also used. They built up a platform. And it's also noted how this ceremony had to happen at nighttime when everyone else in the village was sleeping. She told her assistants when everything started to take her clothes. So there you go, getting naked or at least minimally clothed. You can see the feminine sexual nature of Seiðr there. Again, there are not much specifics given other than that about the actual ritual. But the result of the ritual is that the Völva, Heiðr was her name, gives prophecy to all of those who are around her. A man named Ingjaldir, she told, would be getting good fortune, living until he was very old and surrounded by friends in his death. Another man named Osmundur, he would be a great warrior and well liked by everyone. The main character of this story, Odd, at this time was sleeping, and he wakes up very angry, and he wanted to beat her with a stick if she told of his fortune, because he was a Christian and didn't condone of Seiðr. But the Völva said, it doesn't matter if you hit me or not, your future is set and cannot be changed. Not much more info is given other than that, just about the results, about how all the predictions came true. We have another, half decent detailed account of Seiðr in the Gisla saga. A man named Thorgrim Nef does Seiðr. It's not really a detailed description, but it said Thorgrim Nef. He also builds a Seiðhjálmur, and he does Seiðr with the utmost shame, ergi, and skelminskap. Okay, but with a note, Thorgrim, he was a guy that was actually somewhat respected in the society. He was a strong guy and good with an axe, and was invited to feasts by the village Guði. So he was probably a good and respected dude. He just was involved in some gay stuff here and there that people didn't approve of. Other male Seiðr practitioners, though, were not so lucky. In Olav Tryggvason's saga, the Scytheman Eyvindir is in a conflict with Olav, and he ends up getting killed because he was a Scythe practitioner. He got tied to an island when it was low tide, so they were drowned when the tide rose. This is the exact place right here, by the way, where it happened in Avaldsnes, Norway, more than 1,000 years later. Another is in Harald Fairhair's saga. Harald Fairhair killed one of his own sons because he was meddling in Scythed just like his mother did. Harald's baby mama, who was also, by the way, a Finn. Harald Fairhair definitely, he wasn't Christian like Olav Tryggvason was, or some of the other characters I spoke about, but Harald still had a strong distaste for Scythed and all magic. So Scythed, it could be at some times respected, very respected for its prophecy, but it could be hated if it was being used for negative effects. We have a few mentions of people using Scythed to change the weather, for example, which was not taken kindly to by the people of the village. In Laxdæla saga, Kotkel and his family of Scythmen are described as creating a storm that killed 12 people. Another one in the Fritjof saga, some Scythe women get up on the Scythe platform and create bad weather in an attempt to harm Fritjof. And here in this saga, it specifically says that they wove and spun together harmful magic. There's that spinning and stringing again, so pay attention to that. I'll come back to that at the end. There are a few more examples like this of changing the weather. And we see some other ways of Saidid being used as a negative way. But most of them mention Galdir going along with it. So Galdir is magical chanting. Same as the accounts in Erik Saga and Örvar Odds Saga. So Galdir seemed to be important when doing active things like changing the weather, but it was not necessary. You didn't necessarily need to be chanting things for Saidid. Then we can speak about Saidid as shape-shifting, because this also happens a couple times in the sources. The most clear one comes in Hrolf Saga. A princess named Skuld used Saidid and turns herself into a boar and wreaks havoc within the ranks of Hrolf's army in battle. Note that she also in this source was paid for this, so strengthening the notion that Saidid was mainly a professional service that these people proficient in it would be paid for. Another one comes in Egil Saga. Queen Gunhild transforms into a bird and keeps Egil awake all night. Saidid is not mentioned there, but Queen Gunhild, other parts of the saga, is mentioned as a Seid Kuna, who was taught Saidid by the Finns. And we see that other numerous times in the sources where a royal ethnic Norse woman is taught magic by the Finns. So again, it's bringing that knowledge and that spiritual ritual in from the Finns. We have another in the Völsunga saga. Signy takes the form of a Seid Kuna in order to secretly meet her brother Sigmund. So this, I believe, is the only example of shapeshifting into a human, actually. So it's not that typical, by the way. Saying all this, I'm speaking about shapeshifting with Saidid, but it's definitely not something that usually has anything to do with Saidid in the rest of the sources. Shapeshifting, we see that dozens and dozens of times in the sources. It was a very specific form of magic called Hamid Ahmed, or you would skip the Hamid, like change form, change your Hamid. This was your out of form, your appearance. So shape-shifting, I did a whole video on that. It's a long one that you can watch the whole thing. Saidid is sometimes linked with shape-shifting, but definitely it is two totally different practices. Although the same aspect for both of them could still be present. You send your own soul out of your body to take over animals, just as is done in shape-shifting, and that would be achieved, same as Saidid, as a very similar state of mind or ritual or trance or traditional like shamanic state where they send their soul into other realms. So that part they all do have in common. So as you can see, going over all the Norse sources, the primary difference between Saidid and traditional shamanism, Saidid is used for all of these different purposes that I spoke about, many of them being destructive, whereas shamanism most often has to do with healing or some sort of spiritual journeys. We do have one example, though, in all the Norse sources, just one that I'm aware of, where Saidid was used for healing, and that is in Skaldskaparmal in the Prose Edda. Thor meets the Völva Grua, who uses Saidid to remove a stone shard from his head. So it's not exactly what we think of when we think about traditional shamanic healing, but hey, I'll take it. Saidid could be used to heal too, potentially. One more positive benefit of a Saidid ceremony comes in Landnámabók, where a woman named Thordir used Galdir and Saidid in order to attract the fish into the bay so people could feed themselves in a time of bad harvest. Again, we have this example of calling something to the area. Usually it would be spirits, like was done in the Vaidlukker, the songs that would be sung to attract the spirits, but it could be you could attract fish too, I guess, according to this source. Last part of the video, that's all for the sources. We can speak a little about the archaeology of Saidid. I want to speak about the staffs and specifically spinning. In the archaeology, we find either these full-sized staffs or the smaller wand-sized distaffs that were no longer than a few feet. Like distaffs just used for spinning, like they were spinning yarn, a traditional tool very common of the time. This aspect of spinning is so crucial to Saidid, and a lot of spiritual practices from around the world. I would argue that spinning and weaving is the most powerful spiritual thing we can actually do. This is a super long subject, which I've done other videos on, and I will do more, but just the basic gist of it. This staffs, I'm going to use my pen here as an example. No, I'll use this Hercules hammer. That's more accurate. So pretend this is a staff. You spin it, and you spin it like this. It's an example of sympathetic magic. Just like a distaff turns and it assembles all the yarn to it, the scythed staff assembles whatever spiritual entity is necessary at the time. Sometimes it's assembling the spirits nearby. Sometimes it's assembling fish, as it did in Landnámabók. Sometimes it draws the actual person closer, that's just one purpose of the staff. Another purpose of the staff is that it was used for similar purpose as in other shamanic traditions from around the world. The staff is an extension of the spine. That's a little model here. Good. So spine here, okay? The staff is an extension of the spine, and then we take it out and we see it out here. Put it in his hand, put it in Hercules' hand, even though Hercules would definitely not be practicing any scythed. So the staff is an extension of the spine, and we have it out here. It acts as a focal point outside of the shaman's body in order to help them better send their spirit out into other realms. I've even heard in some traditions that they use the staff to represent the Axis Mundi, which is the world tree that shamans travel up and down and go into other realms. Guys, it's all sympathetic magic. It's what I speak about on this channel all the time. Every ritual we have has something to do with sympathetic magic, imitating something in order to achieve the similar effect that we want. Another use for the staff would be to apply the magic ointment. All right, you guys want to see it? I'll give it to you. So the staff would be used to apply the magic ointment. They would put the magic ointment on the staff. All these folk tales we hear about witches later in history rubbing this hallucinogenic or psychoactive ointment on their staff and under their armpits or in between their legs, all around in their puss, so that these substances are absorbed by the sweat glands and used to get them into their trance state. We know they did this. We have plenty of records of this from more modern times. Guess what, though? When Christianity came into Europe, staffs were made illegal. And they didn't stop doing scythed, though, or this shamanism. They just used a different thing. They didn't use staffs, they used broomsticks instead. They couldn't outlaw broomsticks. So this is one of the many reasons why scholars think that this scythed shamanism practice is the root of all these folk tales which we have of witches on broomsticks. That's why I believe that scythed was not just a Norse practice. It wasn't just a Finnish practice, but it was native to all of Northern European culture. It's just because we have these same folk tales from so far away from Scandinavia, much later on in time, and even in the United States, they have not just tales, but legit legal court cases, all the way up until the 1600s and 1700s of witches riding on broomsticks. Last thing, I touched on it a little bit before, the psychedelic substances. I know you're all going to want to hear about that. In the archaeology, there have been two interesting substances found in what are believed to be Völva graves. Cannabis seeds found in the Oseberg burial, and henbane seeds found in the Völva grave at Firkat, Denmark. That's just what has been found, okay? But I have no doubt that there were more substances, and they were used quite often and were key importance to scythed and our shamanism in the north of Europe to get into this ecstatic trance state. That's all I'll say. Long video. That was way too long, but I covered everything I wanted to and pretty much all of the sources in good detail. I'm linking a couple great free articles down below if you want to read more. But I'll leave you with this one before I go. Here's a wonderful chart from an article compiling most of the attestations of scythed and breaking it down. You know, was it a man or woman doing the scythed? What was the function? What was the result? The method? Daytime or nighttime? And lots more info. So check that out if you like. But that's all for this video. Lots more to come on shamanism in the next coming months. But that's all for today. Vi ses nästa gång.